Good morning, and welcome to the Resource Productivity and Recovery Authority's annual public meeting. I'm Jess Turquette, Manager of Communications, and I will be your MC for today's meeting. As we have for the past 2 years, we are holding today's proceedings virtually due to the ongoing COVID-19 pandemic. This portion of the meeting, as well as remarks from Robert Poirier, Chair of Rpra's Board of Directors, CEO Frank Denton, and Registrar Mary Cummins, have been pre-recorded. Following these recorded messages, there will be a live question and answer session. I invite you to use the Zoom question and answer function to share your questions throughout today's proceedings. To pose a question, click on the Q&A tab at the bottom of your screen, type your question into the text box, and press send. We will address as many of your questions as we can. If you experience any technical difficulties, you can let our team know by emailing info@rpra.ca, and we will do our best to provide support. We have scheduled today's meeting for an hour and a half, and we are expecting more than 100 participants online this morning. I now have the pleasure of introducing the Chair of Rpra's Board of Directors, Robert Poirier, who will provide an overview of our key activities from 2021.
Thank you, Jess. Good morning, everyone. On behalf of Rpra's Board of Directors, the Executive Management Team and staff, I would like to thank you for joining us today for our annual public meeting. I want to express my appreciation for your continued interest in our work, and of course, for participating in today's proceedings. Though we are hosting this year's meeting online, we acknowledge that Toronto, where Rpra's office is located, is the traditional territory of many nations, including the Anishinaabe, the Haudenosaunee, and the Wendat peoples. The authority also acknowledges that it is meeting in the area covered by Treaty 13, also known as the Toronto Purchase, and pays its respects to the Mississaugas of the Credit First Nation. Ontario is unique in that its land base is covered by treaty and land purchase agreements with the original occupants of the land, the First Nations, who continue to care for this land and continue to shape Ontario today. And the authority wants to show its respects for this. I'd like to acknowledge the ongoing impact of the COVID-19 pandemic on our lives, both personally and professionally. The people, as well as governments, have proven to be resilient and adaptive. I know we are all looking forward to emerging from this pandemic stronger than when it first started. As administrative authority of the Government of Ontario, we are accountable to the Minister of the Environment, Conservation and Parks, the public, and our stakeholders, including all of you online with us this morning. Our annual public meeting, along with the annual report we published earlier this month, are two key public disclosure and accountability requirements. There are also opportunities for Rpra to explain what we accomplished in 2021 to deliver on the mandate given to us by the government and address questions you may have about our operations. Ontario's circular economy made major advances in 2021, and we are proud to have played a contributing role in both the environmental and economic change currently underway in our province. Of course, the true drivers of this paradigm shift in waste management are you, our stakeholders, the businesses that are responsible for supplying goods in Ontario, and the businesses that manage the products and packaging consumers dispose of when they're finished using them. Because we are funded exclusively through fees charged to regulated parties, we are obliged to be responsible stewards of those fees. This meeting is an important opportunity to demonstrate accountability in how those fees were used in 2021 to fulfill our legislative mandate. Following my remarks, you will hear more about our financial performance from CEO Frank Denton. And from Mary Cummins, our recently appointed registrar, you will hear more about our key accomplishments in enforcing the province's circular economy laws and delivering digital reporting services on behalf of the Ontario government. Collaboration underpins everything we do here at Rpra. Collaboration with businesses, municipalities, First Nations, the Ministry of the Environment, Conservation and Parks, industry funding organizations, and stewardship organizations. The perspectives and advice we have heard from all of these organizations have guided our work over the past 5.5 years, since Rpra was established in November 2016. We appreciate the changes that are underway are complex and challenging for all organizations that need to adapt to regulatory reform. That's why we have focused our efforts on minimizing the regulatory burden on businesses, supporting our registrants in understanding and complying with the new regulatory requirements, and delivering value for money in our operations. All of our efforts are guided by the objective of achieving the outcomes intended by the reforms we are responsible for implementing. Last year, the Minister of the Environment, Conservation and Parks, David Piccini, directed us to establish an Industry Advisory Council and also a Service Provider Advisory Council. These councils formalize the partnerships that have informed our work to date and provide a forum through which we can solicit advice and feedback on our work. Both councils focus on Rpre's financial matters, including the development of our annual business plan, which sets out our 3-year strategic priorities, and also our resource requirements. I'd like to thank Carol Hoshu, President and CEO of the Tire Rubber Association of Canada, who co-chairs the Industry Advisory Council, and Paulina Leon, Chief Sustainability Officer with Intera Group, who co-chairs the Service Provider Advisory Council. Your professionalism and insights have been invaluable to us, and we appreciate the effort and energy invested in engaging with Rpra. I would also like to thank Tom Wright, our Board Vice Chair, who co-chairs both councils. The engagement with stakeholders over the past year was critically important as we expand the number of producer responsibility programs from 3 in 2020, tires, batteries, and ITAV, to 5 with the additional regulations for both hazardous and special products and Blue Box. We also launched 2 digital reporting services. These projects, as directed by the Minister, one for excess soil and the second for industrial and liquid hazardous waste. These digital services will support the regulatory programs delivered by the Ministry. These projects also benefited from our collaborative approach with industry stakeholders. The working groups that were established for both projects ensured the excess soil registry, which was completed last year, is both user-friendly and reflects business processes widespread in the industry. Similarly, the working group that is currently advising the development of the digital reporting service for the hazardous waste program will ensure the new service supports the needs of the industry to comply with regulatory requirements for industrial and liquid hazardous waste. The strength of our partnerships was the key to our success last year in launching 2 new programs for hazardous and special products and also Blue Box, and for completing 4 new registry projects on time and within budget. I'd also like to take a moment to thank the main industry representatives and stakeholders who have collaborated with us over the past year and who were working closely with us. Your advice and insights have benefited our project so much, and we hope our efforts are apparent in our work. I would also like to thank Rpre's executive team and staff, led by CEO Frank Denton, for their dedication and commitment to transforming waste management in Ontario. Your tireless efforts have contributed to real progress in achieving the Ontario government's objectives to advancing Ontario's circular economy. Over the past year, my first full year as chair of the Rpra Board of Directors, I've had the privilege of working with a diverse and talented group of board directors. Their strategic vision has guided the authority's work over the past year, and many of the organization's successes could be attributed in part to their oversight and advice. In 2021, we welcomed 3 new directors to the board: Tanweer Galani, Marnie Silver, and Jeffrey Steiner. A 4th, Janet Clark, joined us in early 2022. We also said farewell to one Christine Baume, and immensely are thankful for all her efforts. All were appointed by the Minister as part of the overall governance framework that ensures Rpre's accountability to the Minister. I'm deeply thankful to each and every one of our current and former directors for their strategic guidance of Rpre's work over the past year. Finally, I'd like to thank Minister Piccini and his staff for their support, advice, and confidence in Rpre's role in implementing the Ontario government's vision for a waste-free future. 2022 is another year of milestones in the province's ongoing transformation of how resource recovery and waste management are delivered in Ontario. By the end of this year, we expect to complete 3 ongoing registry and digital reporting projects launched in 2021. We'll be operating 6 EPR compliance programs and running 2 digital reporting services on behalf of the Ministry. We will ensure the success of these initiatives through our continued commitment to collaborating with our industry stakeholders, municipal partners, First Nations, and the Ministry, and operating, of course, transparently and cost-effectively. Frank Denton, Rpre CEO, will now provide an update on the authority's financial and operational performance in 2021. Over to you, Frank, and welcome.
Thank you, Robert, and good morning, everyone. Thank you again for joining us for our annual public meeting. It's been 3 years since our last in-person meeting. Since March 2020, all of our engagements with all of our stakeholders have been virtual. It's worked well overall, but I know we all miss the conversations that used to occur at live events. I'm hopeful we'll be able to meet again in person before too long. Until then, I appreciate everyone's patience with yet another online meeting. The end of 2021 marked the halfway point in the implementation of a 10-year reform to advance Ontario's circular economy. The Waste Free Ontario Act, which established the province's framework for extended producer responsibility, was passed in late 2016, and by 2026, all the legacy programs, including every municipality and First Nation participating in the Blue Box, will have transitioned to the new framework. That gives us a lot to reflect on and a lot to look forward to. Since Rpre began operating on November 30th, 2016, we've gone from 0 EPR programs to operating 6 programs in various stages of transition under 5 separate regulations. We started by transitioning the legacy used tires program, operated by Ontario Tire Stewardship, to the new framework on January 1st, 2019. Batteries followed July 1st, 2020. And last year, ITT audiovisual transitioned on January 1st, 2021. And hazardous and special products, covering 9 separate materials, transitioned last October 1st. We began registering producers and municipalities under the Blue Box regulation ahead of that program's transition starting in 2023. And finally, the lighting program will begin in 2022. We also undertook work beyond producer responsibility programs at the direction of the minister. Last year, we built an excess soil registry to support the ministry's implementation of this new regulation. And we began the development of a digital reporting service for industrial and liquid hazardous waste under the program delivered by the ministry. Although Rpre's registry was not designed initially to deliver digital reporting systems beyond waste diversion, Rpre and the ministry recognized that the Salesforce platform that we're using was well suited to this expanded mandate. And we're pleased that we've been able to support these 2 regulatory programs operated by the ministry. As Robert noted, 2021 was a year of intensive engagement with our stakeholders, both formally through our advisory councils and consultations, and informally through tens of thousands of calls and emails and meetings as we guided our registrants through their adaptation to the new programs. We hosted a record number of consultations in 2021, including on fees, registry procedures, and the distribution of surplus funds under the Legacy Used Tires program. These consultations generated productive discussions and informed important decisions that impact our operations and those of our stakeholders. The feedback we receive both inform our decisions and sensitize us to the impact of our work on businesses, municipalities, and First Nations. The Blue Box program is by far the largest legacy program, as well as the last of transition. A year ago, the government released the Blue Box regulation, which sets out a series of steps to enable the transition to a system that will be delivered and paid for by producers. The transition of the Blue Box will bring major changes to the way this program is delivered across Ontario. It will enable producers to take responsibility for delivering a single province-wide program across the province to replace over 200 individual programs currently delivered by participating municipalities and First Nations. The reform will ensure the program continues to be convenient and accessible for all Ontarians. It will standardize what goes into the Blue Box in every household. The change will take the cost burden off municipalities and give producers more incentive to innovate and find cost savings. The transition will occur over a 3-year period, beginning in 2023. To prepare for that transition, a number of events occurred in 2021 following the finalization of the regulation. Release of the regulation triggered the planned resignation of the Stewardship Ontario Board of Directors. The Rpre board appointed Sue Lowe as administrator to oversee Stewardship Ontario's implementation of the approved wind-up plan. In preparation for the transition of the new Blue Box system, the Stewardship Ontario team, working with Rpre staff, took steps to simplify many of the processes that underpin the current program. Last September, following consultations with various stakeholders, Rpre approved changes to the municipal funding allocation model. The model, which is used to distribute funding from Blue Box program stewards to municipalities and First Nation communities, was simplified to better support the program's transition to the new regulatory framework. The MFAM will now use a simple fixed percentage approach that gives all programs the same % funding of their reported net costs. This will make it easier for programs to understand and predict the funding they receive during the transition period. In December, the Rpre board approved a simplified methodology to set the Blue Box Steward funding obligation. That's the total amount stewards are required to pay municipalities to operate the current system. This change was made possible by an agreement reached between Stewardship Ontario, AMO, and the City of Toronto. It was facilitated by Rpre staff. The steward funding obligation, which has for a number of years been a contentious process, will now be set based on 50% of reported net costs. A third effort to simplify the administration of the program is the simplified steward fee setting methodology to determine the amount each steward pays into the current system. This effort began in 2021 and was completed with the Rpre board approval in March of this year. The new methodology will allow stewards to forego supply reporting during the transition period, which will substantially reduce their administrative burden. A key focus in 2021 for Rpre and Stewardship Ontario was the protection of confidential and commercially sensitive data held by Stewardship Ontario's service provider, CSSA. GFL's acquisition of CSSA to establish a pro offering resource recovery compliance services under the new regulation raised concerns among stewards about the security of their data. So Rpre engaged with Stewardship Ontario, and Stewardship Ontario implemented additional measures to protect steward data, mitigate any conflicts of interest, and support a fair and competitive marketplace for resource recovery services. We also took a number of actions in 2021 to support the smooth wind-up of the other legacy programs. Final steps were taken for the wind-up of the Municipal Hazardous or Special Waste Program operated by Stewardship Ontario and industry stewardship organizations. That occurred on September 30th of 2021. We also worked with the court-appointed liquidator of OTS to distribute initial $12 million in residual funds to eligible stewards. The remaining funds will be distributed following the resolution of a tax matter with the Canada Revenue Agency. I'd now like to speak to Rpre's approach to budgeting in 2021. Rpre is a cost recovery organization funded exclusively through fees charged to regulated parties. Currently, that's all the producers on the Waste-Free Ontario Act. Our overriding financial goal is to ensure we're adequately resourced to deliver the services necessary to achieve the government's objectives and to do so in as efficient and cost-effective manner as possible. Our understanding of the outcomes the government seeks for us to deliver is drawn from our legislation, from our regulations, and from the minister's directions we receive. And we also look to the minister and the government's broader statements about the outcomes it seeks for the businesses and the people of Ontario. We appreciate that our fees, although small compared to the overall costs associated with compliance with these regulations, are costs borne by producers and ultimately by consumers when they purchase products. In 2021, we continue to make every effort to manage our costs responsibly while meeting the expectations of thousands of organizations that rely on our support in adapting to the multiple reforms underway. In 2021, we sought third-party expertise in a number of areas. We brought in outside experts to review our approach to building the registry system. This review confirmed that we're well aligned with best practices and identified a number of areas to strengthen our approach, which we are now implementing. We also brought in experts to review our approach to fee setting, including both our cost allocation methodology and our fee model. Both of these were assessed as reasonable, while also noting alternative approaches for future consideration. We also used a newly established Industry Advisory Council and the Service Provider Advisory Group to consult on our business planning and budgeting process. The input we received helped shape our 2022 budget and our business plan. As the number of EPR programs we administer grew to 6, the regulated community's needs for support increased. By year end, as Mary is going to speak to, the volume and complexity of requests for assistance had grown substantially. Our 2021 annual report, now on our website, shows that our operating expenses increased year over year in lockstep with the expansion of our mandate. The $8.9 million in 2020 grew to $11.7 million in 2021 as our mandate expanded to the current total of 6 programs under 5 regulations. At year end, we were under budget, as we have been in every year of our operations. The largest increase was related to expenses for salaries and benefits as our staff complement increased from 34 in 2020 to 48 FTEs in 2021. And that was mainly frontline services, compliance, and communication functions. We recruited talented new staff reflective of the province's diversity with an impressive range of skills and experiences. We also saw increases in registry expenses and other operating expenses with the completion of 4 portals and launch in 2021 of the digital reporting service for hazardous waste. Registry expenses increased from $1 million in 2020 to 1.5 in 2021, and other operating expenses increased from $272,000 to $477,000. We also increased our communications expenses from $170,000 in 2020 to $267,000 in 2021 to support registrants in understanding and complying with the new regulatory requirements. The registry system that underpins the authority's operations is the organization's key asset. It enables Rpra to fulfill its legislated mandate to register regulated parties and receive information as outlined in the regulation. At the end of 2021, we had invested $11.5 million on the registry system on the following basis: $5.2 million on the foundation or common elements, $2.1 million on the tires registry, $1.3 million on the electronics and batteries registry, $1 million on the excess soils registry, and $1.8 million on systems currently under construction. And you can find full details in the financial statements presented in our annual report, which explains how Rpra's investments are supporting Ontario's strategy for a cleaner and more prosperous future. One of our most important contributions to Ontario's effort to increase recovery rates in the future is public reporting on resource recovery performance. This will be informed by data reported into our registry as required under the regulations. 2021 was the first year that Rpra had data available on resource recovery performance under the Resource Recovery and Circular Economy Act. Our annual report last year included performance outcomes for the tires program, the first program to transition. And this was the first time in Ontario history that published performance data was reviewed and verified by a regulatory authority with the power to confirm accuracy. As performance reports for other programs become due under the regulations beginning in 2022, Rpra is committed to timely and accurate reporting on Ontario's progress to a circular economy across all the EPR programs. And we're currently in a consultation on how best to deliver on public performance reporting. We look forward to delivering on the government's commitment to enhance transparency, accountability, and accessibility for the environmental outcomes promised by this transition. As we hit the halfway point in our current delivery year, we're still in the midst of intensive implementation across multiple programs. As Mary's going to outline, we're on track to complete registry projects for hazardous and special products, the blue box, and industrial and liquid hazardous waste. We'll also launch the lighting program under the electronics regulation and open up the lighting registry later this year. I'd like to close my remarks by thanking my colleagues here at Rpra, the board of directors, executive colleagues, and all of the Rpra staff. I'd also like to thank former Chief Financial Administration Officer Sandra Montague and former Chief Information Officer John Pennard, who both left in July of 2021. I want to thank them for their many contributions during the early years. We have a refreshed executive team with Lisa Innes as our Chief Information Officer and Lorella Hayes as Chief Financial and Administration Officer. We also welcomed Mary Cummins as our new registrar. Mary previously served as Deputy Registrar, and she replaces Noah Gitterman, who has assumed a new portfolio of responsibilities, continuing as General Counsel and also as Chief of Strategic Initiatives. I'm grateful to our ministry partners for their support in helping us ensure that we're operating in a way that meets the ministers and the government's expectations. And finally, I want to thank the many people in business, in government, and other organizations across Ontario for the time and effort that you've put into asking us the right questions, giving us your best advice on how we can strengthen our organization. Our collective efforts are transforming resource recovery in Ontario. The work we're engaged in today is creating a foundation that in years to come will support Ontario's journey on a path to sustainability. Thank you. I will now turn it over to Mary Cummins, Rpra's registrar, to provide highlights on our compliance work in 2021.
Good morning, everyone. I'd like to start by acknowledging my colleague, Noah Gitterman, Rpra's General Counsel and Chief of Strategic Initiatives, who served as registrar in 2021. I had the privilege of working closely with him as Deputy Registrar over the past year, and the honor of succeeding him as registrar at the beginning of this year. As Robert and Frank noted, the past year has been one of change and challenge. as we rolled out multiple EPR compliance programs and built multiple registry portals and digital reporting services. The team's focus over the past year was on helping businesses understand the new blue box and hazardous and special products regulations that were released last June. We also continued our work supporting businesses to comply with the requirements of the batteries, electronics, and tires regulations. And we worked closely with industry representatives to develop user-friendly reporting portals for batteries, electronics, and excess soils. Rpre's compliance program is rooted in a risk-based compliance approach. It means we focus our compliance activities on areas of greatest risk to the successful implementation and operation of the regulations, as well as the government's overall policy objectives. As such, one of the main focuses of our compliance activities is to identify free riders and bring them into compliance with the regulations. This includes verifying producer data that is used to calculate their performance requirements. Over the past year, the compliance and registry team identified over 900 free riders that did not register by the deadline and brought them into compliance. Our compliance activities seek to support the government's desired policy outcomes for the circular economy, which includes fair and well-functioning markets. We start our work assuming the good intentions of our regulated community and use communication tools to support compliance. We also have a full range of regulatory enforcement tools, which include inspections, audits, and prosecution when enforcement action is necessary in order to achieve compliance. We look forward to expanding our toolkit when the administrative penalties regulation is finalized. We appreciate that the change underway in Ontario's regulatory framework for resource recovery is complex and deeply impactful on the businesses we regulate. Our engagement with the businesses we regulate gives us insight into the many challenges of understanding how they will comply with the new regulations. This helps us develop more refined tools, materials, and messages to better support the regulated community in understanding and following the regulations. The team also logged more than 30,000 emails and more than 6,000 phone calls. Each one interaction requires our officers to engage with registrants to respond to questions and concerns, understanding and complying with the regulations. Many of you know these regulations are often highly technical, requiring careful interpretation and assistance. Some of these interactions are routine and efficiently dispatched, but many are highly individualized and require complex interpretations. These interpretations are happening for the first time for our regulated communities, our compliance officers, and our registry support team, and our legal team. These interactions require a deep dive into supply chain processes and consultation with legal counsel, as well as an understanding of business relationships. The authority has embarked on a learning curve of an inestimable insight. We are pleased that we have a compliance team that is made up of many individuals who came from producer companies. They are uniquely positioned to understand producer concerns and how businesses operate so that they're able to better assist regulated communities. We are committed to continuing this learning effort. This is a journey we are all taking into a new regulatory framework that requires collaboration and patience. Collectively, we are achieving high rates of compliance, and I'm incredibly appreciative of the efforts of my team and especially those of the regulated community. Batteries transitioned to the new EPR regulatory framework in July 2020, and the registration deadline was extended to the end of January 2021 to give registrants more time to register. Using compliance discretion to assist the regulated community like this is one of the key tools available to me as registrar. the team identified 120 battery producer free riders in 2021 and brought all of them into compliance by the end of March this year. In total, 185 producers had registered by the end of March this year. At the close of 2021, 84% of registered producers had reported their supply data, representing 63% of single-use battery supply for 2020 and 94% of rechargeable battery supply. The electronics regulation came into effect on January 1st of last year. The compliance and registry team identified and brought into compliance 137 free riders who had failed to register by the deadline. By the end of March this year, we had registered 184 ITTAV producers. And by the end of 2021, 82% of registered producers had reported their supply data, representing 98% of the 2019 ITTAV supply. The Hazardous and Special Products Regulation came into effect on October 1st of last year. At the close of 2021, 125 producers had registered with us, including 66 high priority producers who supplied over 55% of the weight of HSP reported to Stewardship Ontario under their legacy program. Registration for this campaign continued into 2022, and the team has now registered all high priority producers. The Blue Box regulation was released in June of last year, and producers required to register and report their data to us for 2020. The compliance and registry team focused on priority producers representing 80% of the supply reported through the current program operated by Stewardship Ontario. By the end of 2021, we had registered 89% of these priority producers. Municipalities and local service boards were also required under the regulation to report details of their current collection systems. By the reporting deadline at the end of September last year, we had full compliance with all but one municipality submitting the required reports. Last year was the third year of operations for the EPR program for tires, the first material designated under the new regulatory framework. At the end of March this year, we had 477 producers registered with us in the tires program. Audited performance reports submitted by registrants last year show that the 85% recovery rate for all tires set out in the tires regulation was exceeded by achieving an 86% recovery rate. We've created a performance reporting section on our website where more information will be available on the tires program. This section of our website will evolve to become the central point for public performance reporting, including supply reporting. We will be updating this section of the website regularly as reporting data becomes available for all of our programs. As Frank and Robert noted, we were directed by the Minister to build digital reporting services for programs operated by the Ministry of the Environment, Conservation and Parks. Last year, we completed the Excess Soils Registry. The digital reporting service for industrial and liquid hazardous waste will be completed later this year. To better support the user of these services, as well as the producer responsibility program registrants, we structured the compliance and registry team into two divisions this past year. Compliance and registry officers will focus their work on compliance, such as identifying free riders and conducting inspections and audits. Our team of registry support officers will focus their work on service delivery to businesses, including responding to registrant inquiries and supporting registration and reporting campaigns. As the number of programs and services we operate grows, and as those programs evolve and mature, we will continue to adapt the compliance and enforcement function to support the outcomes of Ontario's circular economy strategy. Our focus on communications and education to support compliance has been effective and will continue to be our primary and preferred approach to compliance. But as we begin the move from startup mode to operational, we also have to adapt our enforcement approach to identify persistent and defiant non-compliant actors to support a level playing field. I'd like to end my remarks by thanking the regulated community we work with for their engagement with our teams and for their active efforts to comply with the regulatory requirements. I'd also like to thank the many compliance and registry officers and their managers, Ryan McAfee and Pam Castillo, for their passion and commitment to their work. Their work ethic, professionalism, and deep knowledge of these regulations have been critical to the momentum that has been established in Ontario's circular economy. I'd also like to thank Frank and Robert for their confidence in me. And finally, I'd like to thank Noah for his support over the past year and for his ongoing counsel. As previous speakers have noted, the first phase of Ontario's circular economy strategy is at the midpoint. All of Ontario's legacy waste diversion programs have either transitioned to the new framework or are in the process of being transitioned. The direction of the next 5 years will be determined by Ontario's new government, and we look forward to faithfully executing any new directions we are issued. Thank you.
At this time, I'd like to open up the live question and answer portion of the annual public meeting. We already have a couple questions in the queue, as well as some that we've received via email. But as a reminder to pose a question, you can click on the Q&A tab at the bottom of your screen and type your question into the text box and click send. We will do our best to answer all your questions. If Frank, Mary, or Robert do not have the answer readily available, or if your question is specific to your situation, we will follow up with you directly after the meeting. Likewise, if we don't have the time to get to all of the questions, we will follow up with you after the meeting. So let's kick this off. First question. What happens in the event that a shareholder does not meet the minimum gross sales amount to report, but may meet at least one of the item minimum report limits, i.e. glass? How or what is the best way to report on this? Mary, I'll hand that to you.
Thank you, Jess. So I believe the question that is being asked here is if you are a producer, as defined under the Blue Box regulation, but do not have more than 2 million in sales, that you're exempt from registration. So what that means is when you log into the Blue Box registry, the first question that's going to be asked is, what are your gross sales? Are they under or over 2 million? And if you say they're under 2 million, you have no requirement to continue. If you know this ahead of time, that you're under 2 million, you have no requirement to even log into the portal and answer that question. So this is really, even if you have, over the amount of Blue Box materials outlined that are de minimis for tonnages in the Blue Box regulation, that's the first threshold that you need to pass, under or over 2 million.
Thank you, Mary. This question here is for Frank. Now that we know which single-use products will be banned by the federal government and when they will be banned by the end of this year, will Rpra recommend to the incoming Environment Minister that any banned materials be immediately removed from the list of designated Blue Box materials? Otherwise, producers could waste lots of money finding ways to recycle these smaller items when they'll be banned very soon.
Thank you for that question, Julie. It's very timely. Most or all of us heard the federal government's very recent announcement on a single-use plastic ban. The answer is that Rpra would not make a recommendation of this nature. We don't proactively put forward our ideas on how the government should pursue its policy objectives. We do give advice to the government as they're developing policy. If the government came to us and said, we're contemplating a policy such as banning these materials, how would this be implemented? What would be the implementation implications of it? Then we would give our best advice, but we would not proactively take a recommendation like this to government.
Thanks, Frank. I do have a couple questions that came in through our communications, our general inbox. So I'm going to switch to those and then come back to the Q&As here in Zoom. A couple questions from Mary as they're compliance related. One of them is, what is the Rpra doing to tackle free riders in the system? And how many free riders have you managed to change into paying members? And maybe a quick, what is a free rider, Mary, for those who don't know what that term means?
Absolutely. So free riders are companies that are obligated producers under one of the regulations, but have either not registered or reported to Rpra, or have registered and reported to Rpra, but have not established a collection and management system if they're required to do so, or if they're not actually operating that collection and management system. So in effect, they are getting a free ride on the system from the other compliant producers. So Rpra, as I noted during my speech there, we brought in last year just over 900 free riders across all the programs. We approach free riders using a risk-based approach. So what that means is we're starting first with the producers who were registered with the legacy programs. So that's Stewardship Ontario or Electronic Stewardship or OTS. We start with those producers first, contacting them and bringing them in. And you will note from the presentation, we've had a high degree of success there. Then we move over to starting to look into free riders that are either newly obligated under this regulation, may not be aware, or companies that never complied under the Waste Diversion Transition Act programs. And we do that using a variety of different tools at our fingertips. So we do have inspection powers granted to us under the statute that allows us to inspect and ask questions to determine if someone is in fact a producer. And we also have the ability to do a lot of research. We work closely with other regulated entities, and we work closely with industry associations to find out more information and make sure that we're getting the message out there for folks who may not even realize that these programs exist and that they now have obligations under them.
Thank you, Mary. Another kind of related question on free riders. So if a pro identifies a free rider, how should the pro handle this? For example, should they just tell Rpra and wait for Rpra to get them registered, or is there another course of action to take?
So you just let Rpra know, our email, registry@rpra.ca. As I said earlier, we take a risk-based approach to everything that we do in order to effectively deploy our resources. So every free rider case that we receive, we do look into it, and then they're assessed and assigned different priority levels and timelines to bring them into compliance in order to effectively deploy our resources. So up until the moment that they're registered, it would be difficult for a pro to try to sell their services to them for compliance and performance, because they may or may not actually be a producer. There are a number of potential free riders are identified to us that upon inspection are not actually producers. So until they've registered, you do need to sort of wait for that trigger.
Thanks, Mary. I'm going to go back to the Zoom Q&As, and thanks for that individual for sending them via email. We appreciate that. I'm going to read this one here that had an upvote. That means that somebody else wanted to hear it as well. So it's fair to say the blue box regulation is not an easy read. Producers, both those who were stewards under the old program and companies who have not previously had obligations in Ontario, have a real need for support while navigating these regulations. What can producers expect from Rpra to ensure customer service and assistance? I'll hand that over to Mary.
Thank you, Jess. I'll let Frank respond to some of this as well, but we need to balance our priorities in terms of registrant services. We know that these regulations are difficult to understand and comprehend. We try to speak to our registrants using plain language and respond to our registrants in a timely manner with their questions, especially since they're often up against compliance deadlines that they're trying to meet. We will note that with the timelines that these regulations came out, we received a high influx of questions and haven't been able to get to all of them in a timely manner. And we are working through that case load with folks. I will also note that we've learned that there really is no end to the questions. So even tires regulation, which has been out for some time, we are working very hard and diligently to make sure that we're providing services across all of the programs so that we're balancing excellent customer service, excellent registry services, compliance and enforcement, using our risk-based tools, going after the free riders, and accomplishing all of the outcomes and what Rpra needs to do under our mandate. Frank, is there anything that you wanted to add to that?
Thanks, Mary. Not much. One thing Mary, often reminds me is that we need to focus on answers to questions people need the answers to now. So people, Mary, if you get a question, how's this going to work out in 2 or 3 years? That's not an urgent question for today. It's very much a cross-team effort by communications and by compliance. Everybody's painfully aware of a backlog that we're all trying to pull down. But there will be a backlog for some time to come. But it's absolutely the priority to help businesses and municipalities understand what they need to do before they need to do it, but not too far before.
That's a great point, Frank. In a way that you can demonstrate how we're utilizing our risk-based compliance framework live. The inspectors are triaging these questions, always getting back, letting them know the question's been received. But ultimately, if you don't hear from us and you take a look at your question, it's one of those questions that what's happening in 2 to 3 years, we're really focused on making sure that we can get these programs transitioned.
At the same time, people want to know what's happening in a few years, and you've got broader webinars, Mary, to explain the big picture. We know the big picture is important, the long-term picture is important, but when it comes down to specific questions, the focus is on the near term.
Absolutely.
Thank you, Frank and Mary. This question here, I'll say this is for Mary. What process does Rpra follow to ensure obligated materials are not imported from out of province to meet Ontario management targets?
So that's very similar to the free rider question, I think. So if materials are being imported into the province, you could be captured as a potential producer because you're an importer. So not the brand owner, resident in Canada, but you're importing into the province. So we would be looking at those companies as potential free riders. And I sort of overviewed quickly some of the tools available to us and the processes that we go through to determine whether or not somebody is a producer because they're either the brand owner, resident in Canada, or an importer of those materials resident in Ontario. Each of the regulations have different requirements as well for direct sales to consumers. So we're talking about virtual marketplaces, online retail stores where there is no residence and it's being shipped directly to the consumers. So each of those regulations does identify who is the producer in those cases. And again, they're just free riders like anyone else if they aren't registering and reporting.
Thank you, Mary. I'll throw this one to Mary as well. This has to do with newspaper stewards in the blue box regulation. Who is going to pay the cost of collecting and processing old newspapers now that newspaper publishers are not going to be obligated, or they're exempt? Another free rider question, I guess.
Sort of. They're not free riders in the same sense because they don't have the obligations under the regulation to perform if they meet the de minimis threshold set in that regulation. Ultimately, though, it's still a blue box material that is collected in the blue box. It's still able to count towards a producer's management requirements for paper. But those newspaper producers do not need to recover that material, which means that they're not paying any costs associated with it. And the individuals who are paying for those costs, so other paper producers or other producers under the blue box regulation, are able to pay for those costs and count that towards their own recovery targets as well.
Thank you. All right. So the this is a Mary question. The 2020 collection results for tires indicated the target was missed. To what does Rpra attribute the shortfall, and is it indicative of a compliance issue that requires action from Rpra?
So in terms of the collection target, it absolutely was missed. It's actually been missed every year, but the system itself is operated. So when we're taking a look at the approach we take to compliance, the collection system has exceeded the amounts of sites that are required across Ontario. On top of that, all of the sites are continually being operated. We've had no concerns in this past year actually voiced by any collectors coming to us directly to say that they're not getting serviced or that there's stockpiles somewhere. So from Rpre's perspective, it is easy to see that that system is being operated, the tires are moving, and the recovery rates are being exceeded in terms of what is actually being collected. So whether Rpra and the registrar and the compliance team takes any action on the collection network or the collection target not being achieved would be something we'll talk directly with tire producers and tire pros and to determine those next steps.
Thank you, Mary. There's a follow-up here from a question that was asked about obligated materials that are not imported. And she was referring to scrap versus, I meant scrap being imported, not sale. I don't know if that changes any response from your previous question, Mary.
I'm not sure what scrap, if scrap's actually an obligated blue box material. So I don't think that would be captured under the mandate of that blue box regulation, but we can always follow up one-on-one with them if they need a little bit more clarity there. But if you're referring to scrap metals or scrap materials, that's the end of the life processing, not the sale into the province.
Another question for Mary. This is regarding blue box reporting. So I'm assuming that you are referring to supply. Actually, maybe we'll follow up with you because for blue box reporting, the deadline for supply reporting was moved until October 31st. And we'll be providing more information on that ahead of the reporting period. So the July date is not being enforced right now. Mary, is that anything you want to add?
Yeah, so it was April 30th that supply reporting was due to Rpra. And so that's a producer's 2021 blue box material supply. We did send out notice that we are pushing the deadline for that to October 31st of this year. It's done so for multiple reasons. One, to accommodate the fee setting process and to also accommodate the registry build for blue box so that producers do not have to do a manual process again, which I know was painful for the producers and for Rpra, heavy resources on both ends. So by doing that, we're able to facilitate a much smoother process for reporting for producers this year. So I think that might be the question that's being asked. And any producer who reports by October 31st would be considered in compliance.
Thank you, Mary. This question, I'll hand over to Robert. The RRCEA requires Rpre's registry to be available in French and grants individuals the right to communicate with and receive services from Rpre in French. Can you comment on the status of your French services and registry?
Thank you, Jess. And thank you, Michelle, for your question. Obviously, bilingual services are important to Rpra. Today, we do have bilingual compliance and communication staff. We do translate key documents into French. We are exploring for both the registry and our website full French capability, and we'll have more to report on that soon, and we'll keep you apprised.
Thanks, Robert. Okay, so we have a comment here, and I mean, I'll read it as the communications team. Feedback is always welcome. So mentioning that the website is actually quite difficult to navigate. Are there plans to improve it? So we're always open to your feedback. And if you have any specifics on what was difficult to navigate about it, or if there's information that you couldn't find easily, please send us an email to info@rpra.ca, and we're happy to take that feedback because yes, the website's constantly evolving and changing. changing and growing as our mandates grow and our materials and programs change. So open to your feedback, and look forward to working with stakeholders and make sure the website's in the best place that it can be. Question here for Frank. Can you provide further details on the consultation that Rpre is currently conducting pertaining to program performance reporting? Who can participate, how, and when? You're on mute, Frank.
So we are launching broad consultation planning for this week on how we're going to approach performance reporting. We started consultation with our Industry Advisory Council and our Service Provider Advisory Council to give them, to put forward a draft proposal, and that will now be live in the next few days. If you go to our website, you will see what we reported for tires as of June the 1st. And that'll be give you a sense of the broad direction that we're going in. But this consultation will be open to everybody. We look forward to input on how we can meet this very important part of our mandate. And I will note that there has been impatience expressed about, here we are, it's 2022. Tires was put in place in 2019. Where's the performance reporting? And what we've tried to help people understand is that what can we report out on, and when we can report out is dictated by our legislation. So there are timelines when performance reports need to be provided by producers, and those timelines determine when we'll be able to report out once we've done our due diligence and packaged it up for public consumption. Thank you.
Thanks, Frank. We're going to actually go back to a question that was asked, and I think we just got some clarification on how we can maybe better answer it. So the question was, what process does Rpre follow to ensure obligated materials are not imported from out of province to meet their management targets? And we're understanding that it means asking about producers importing recyclables in order to meet their targets. So Mary, can you respond to that question instead?
Yes, absolutely. So the regulation requires that producers submit audits by a third party of their performance reported to Rpre. Rpre also has full inspection powers to go and review and audit themselves any of the information that's submitted to us for performance, whether that be in the electronics regulation, the batteries regulation, or the blue box regulation. Depending on the regulation and the framework, there could be different market drivers for doing that sort of activity, and it's something that Rpre is prepared to begin to investigate and look into.
Thank you. Okay. Next question here. I'll throw this to Mary first. The EPR regulations that Rpre oversees put lots of responsibilities on retailers when it comes to figuring out if we are the responsible producer within our supply chain. It's very challenging when we deal with thousands of suppliers. In previous discussions, you mentioned that Rpre was looking at the possibility to show the CRA business number on the various Rpre registries, and the possibility of posting a brand registry with the list of the associated brand holder residents in Canada. Is Rpre still looking into this?
It's a great question. It is something that we want to do to help retailers understand their obligations and brand owners throughout. However, we need to make sure that we're doing so within the confines of Section 57 of our statute that requires us to keep information that we receive that's commercially sensitive confidential. And we're speaking with those parties, those producers who have provided that information to us, along with their industry associations, to determine any market sensitivities around that before we go ahead and post things publicly for folks. So there's a bit of a process that needs to be underway in terms of speaking with affected parties, and then also developing that system to be able to support it. So it would require an enhancement to our registry to provide that information. So there's sort of two-step process in that. And right now we're in the stage of speaking with folks to find out what concerns, if any, they would have with us sharing that information. I'm sure retailers can understand they wouldn't want us to just share their information. We equally need to make sure that we're understanding any sensitivities for the brand owners around that as well, including CRA numbers.
Thanks, Mary. There was actually another question from a retailer, I'm guessing, with a similar question, so I hope that answered it for them as well. I do want to follow up from an earlier question. It was about the blue box reporting that was due July 1st, and they're referring to the Pro one for the initial report.
The initial report. So the initial report for pros as of the blue box amendments is coming up due July 1st. That's correct. Is the question, will that deadline be met, or?
Yeah, they were looking regarding an extension.
There's been no request for an extension,
Okay.
nor has there been one granted.
Yes, okay. We can follow up with this individual directly, just to clarify any confusion or misunderstanding. So we will do that and take this offline. Thank you, Mary. Actually, stay off mute. I have another question for you. So thank you, Mary, for expanding stewardship base. This must have been an uphill task. Of the total companies brought in, roughly how many are resident outside Ontario and/or outside Canada?
Oh, great question. So we brought in 4. I'm assuming this is related to Blue Box specifically, but and that's the numbers I have for it. But we can certainly look into it for other regulations where a brand owner in Ontario versus Canada is the issue. So for Blue Box, for instance, we brought in a little over almost 1,000 Blue Box producers, and of that 1,000, over 700 were Ontario based, and almost 300 were outside Ontario, so Canadian based.
Thank you. Next question here. Frank mentioned that the OTS windup has already, and pending an HST ruling, may continue to result in former tire stewards receiving large amounts of surplus funds generated and held by the now defunct OTS program, Ontario Tire Stewardship Program. Are there any expectations of what the former stewards and now producers are expected to do with the funds, or are there no strings attached such that the companies can simply put these consumer generated funds to their bottom lines? Frank, I'll hand that to you.
As many of you know, there's a very protracted matter with the Canada Revenue Agency that leaves millions of dollars in limbo until that's resolved. And that's true of the OTS program as well. There was a minister's direction back in 2021, I think in the spring of 2021, maybe it was 20, actually I think it was 2020. And there is an expectation that when those funds are released to stewards, they will be used for the benefit of consumers. There's not a lot of specificity around that direction, but there is an expectation they'll be used for the benefit of consumers.
This is another similar question that kind of about our website earlier, maybe some feedback and some suggestion. Are there plans on improving the Rpra registry? It is not that user friendly for reporting. I think I'll put the same blanket statement out there unless Mary wants to chime in of, again, if you have any specifics on things that you would like to improve or any kind of frustrations, let us know. Our registry support team and compliance officers are there to help you as well if you're not finding or able to go through the registry as easy as possible. If reporting guides, we do training typically leading up to any kind of reporting or registry launches. So if you have any suggestions or thoughts to improve on that specifics, please let us know. Mary, do you have anything to add?
Yeah, I would add that we've built these registries with producers' money and funding, and have done so and approached building these initial registries from a minimal viable product. So trying to come up with what will be the least cost and burden to producers while balancing user friendliness and ease of use. There can be future enhancements to the registries, but because of the timelines, because of us being very cognizant of funding that we're receiving, the registries are coming out with really what needs to happen. Future improvements, whether that be APIs for folks on the line that may know what that is, that we've been asked for, and folks are sending us suggestions saying, can you do this? Can you do that? We are logging and tracking them all, and also taking a look at them from the perspective of where is the largest bang for that change. So is it going to impact all of the producers across every program? Is it a smaller group? What is it that we're really looking at? So we approach even our registry using, if you will, a risk-based compliance framework, and determining where we most effectively can deploy our resources.
Thanks, Mary. Another question for Mary here. What would trigger an audit of a producer or a pro from the compliance team?
So I don't think that that's something that I would respond to, because then I think folks would know what would trigger an audit in order to be able to avoid an audit from the compliance and inspection team. But I would say that we do have compliance plans that outline what might trigger an inspection, and further looking into by an inspector and being contacted by them to determine the accuracy of the data and the information that's being provided. So we do have those triggers. It's certainly not something that I think makes sense to share. I think everyone can appreciate why we wouldn't share how to avoid getting audited or inspected by your regulator. But what I will say is one thing to keep in mind when you're reporting and interacting with our officers and putting information in the data, asking questions, providing information, letting us know when things aren't clear to you, letting us know if there might be a problem with your data and why. We aren't looking for perfection at every single moment, because we know that can be very burdensome to Ontario businesses. Really what we're looking for is a communication and a dialogue and a collaboration to make sure that information is correct. So don't throw things in hoping that we won't catch it. Talk to us, and there's ways we can work everything out with you.
Thanks, Mary. I'll throw this question to Frank, and maybe Mary can add as well. But how will the proposed blue box changes, so coming out of the new regulation, trickle down to residents in Ontario?
Sure. And Mary, you'll probably have things to add. The overall objective from a consumer point of view of this reform is no disruption to service. So consumers will just keep putting their blue box materials out, before and after transition. Eventually, when the regulation, as transitions happen, there will be a common basket of goods that are obligated materials. And so residents, when they travel around from one municipality to another, will stop asking, why is it styrofoam allowed here but not allowed in this other municipality? It'll be common. There will be there are education and awareness requirements set out in the regulation. It's a responsibility of producers to explain what residents need to know. No doubt municipalities will have involvement in that as well, and I know those discussions are underway. So those are the broad points of the answer. I think there might have been some details that I didn't capture. Mary, do you want to chime in?
I think the one that you hit right there is probably the key one that the consumer will notice, which is a unified provincial system. Lack of confusion over what goes where, strong P&E, making sure that the consumer understands. Producers will be incentivized to make sure the consumer understands. They don't want consumers putting in materials that can't be recycled or accepted, or there aren't blue box materials into their blue bin. So there's going to be a lot of information provided to consumers around that. And I think the biggest one will be a unified system.
Thank you both. I might do the same thing. I'll throw it to Frank first, and then if Mary wants to chime in as well. Have you identified waste diversion or circular economy outcomes in other jurisdictions or agencies against which Rpra can be benchmarked?
We are in the process of developing KPIs. That's a commitment we made this year, and we're trying to get to more outcome-based KPIs consistent with an outcome-based regulation. We don't have we're not looking at a Rpra-based benchmark. how are the outcomes generated by Rpre's regulatory activity compared to outcomes in other jurisdictions? And that's because the outcomes are primarily set in the regulation, right? The target for tires is set out in the regulation. We assess ourselves through whether, to the extent to which those targets are met. We don't have complete control over that, but we have some control over it. And you'll see more through our KPIs, but it's not for us to benchmark outcomes under the regulation, which is made by government relative to outcomes in other jurisdictions. Mary, would you add to that?
Yeah, so I definitely agree with what you're saying there about the outcomes, Frank. That would be left to ministry when they're developing these policies to figure out what they want to benchmark against. What I will say in terms of being a regulator, we spend a significant amount of time speaking to our fellow regulators, whether that's here in Canada or abroad. So speaking to the deputy registrar in Ireland, or speaking to folks out east or out west to get better understandings of ways that we can assist producers as a regulator, and ways that things that have worked for them, things that haven't worked for them, so that we can build those efficiencies in. Not so much about outcomes, because as Frank noted, that's more for the ministry, but more about our effective operations.
Thank you. General question here, will Rpra be running any additional producer information seminars? I can speak to this, and then if Mary wants to chime in. But so as part of our communicating for compliance approach, we regularly will hold webinars and sessions for producers across all of our different programs. Typically, most commonly they'll be around reporting or registration, or big requirements, big pushes that are happening that require some effort from the regulated community. But also sometimes we'll host webinars that, a need appears. There's a question that's confusing a lot of people, or a requirement that's confusing people. So those kind of can pop up on an ad hoc basis as well. So the moment there's nothing scheduled right now, but these come up, very so often when there's a need, when there's a campaign going on, when there's these kind of FAQs that require some broader explanation to our stakeholder group. So these are ongoing always, and yeah, if you're on our mailing list or on our website, you'll be notified when we schedule our next one.
I would add too that we record all of our previous webinars. So if you have a topic that you want to learn more about, you can go to our website, see all of our previously recorded webinars. And if there is something that you need to know or want to have more information on, to let us know, so that we can see and assess that need at a broader base and provide a webinar if needed, or a one-on-one conversation, or a one-on-one meeting, or maybe you're an industry association or a member of an industry association and you want your association to organize something with us, just one-on-one with them and your members. We do all of that. So webinars are only one component of a way that we can interact with you. So we strongly encourage you to talk to your associations and to us about what we can do to better support you. And almost everything's on the table in terms of how we can make sure that this works for you.
And Mary, perhaps you could also speak to this fall when we're going to do one on the role of Rpra. Can you speak to that?
Yeah, so one of the big themes of questions that we've noticed throughout all of our webinars that we get and through all of our interactions with our registrants is understanding Rpra and understanding the government's role, understanding mine and Frank's role and how we work together. And so it's been something that we've noticed a strong need for folks not understanding how Rpra works as a regulator, thinking there's an appeals process. What does that mean? How does that look? Understanding what our complaints process looks like. So we are going to be hosting one this fall to sort of help set the stage as Rpra is a regulator and what it is like to interact with a regulator in this construct and what our roles are at Rpra.
Thank you. This is a comment, but I'll read it. So this is for Blue Box. A certain pro has requirements for a max of 4% contamination in curbside containers will not be achievable in most programs, resulting in bins being tagged and rejected. Residents will be furious, speaking from experience. As pros take over on behalf of stewards, it is likely the backlash will spill to industry. More feasible contamination levels likely low teens. So that's a comment. If Mary wants to comment on that as well.
Yeah, I would recommend that you speak to the pro about that. Rpra doesn't have a role in setting that in those market conversations. That's between service providers, municipalities, and the producers on behalf being represented by their pro. So that's a conversation best suited for that group.
Okay, a couple of questions left. Can you speak to the materials that may or will be targeted for regulations beyond the current transition of the legacy stewardship program materials? Frank, I'll throw that one to you. You're muted.
I think I forgot mute every single time. So can't speak to that question for two reasons. One, we don't know any better than anybody else does. And two, we would never speculate on what the government might be doing. We wait until the government speaks publicly, and then we support the government's decisions. We are going to have a new minister announced, according to Premier Ford, on Friday. We will be all ears to see what future directions, if any, might be coming from the government on other materials that could be regulated. And there certainly are materials that could be regulated that, under the RRCEA. But whether and how and when the government approaches that, we're all waiting to hear.
Thank you. We have one last question here. Is depot collection establishment something in the framework of Rpra strategic plans? Mary?
So Rpra's role does not include setting up the actual system. That's the producers and the pros, and them doing so in accordance with the regulation. So that's not something that Rpra could speak to in terms of what may happen around depot collection systems. If you're talking about depot collection systems in terms of return to deposit, that's ministry. They set the policies on what they want to see across the province. If you're talking about depot collection services for your blue box material under the blue box regulation, you should speak to the producers, the pros on their behalf. Rpra is not involved in the operations of these systems.
Thanks, Mary. So I think that we have one final, this is a comment, but I think it's a great one, as Mary and Robert were just speaking about this webinar that we'll be hosting later this year on the role of Rpra. The suggestion is, can you mention how the system here in Ontario is different from provinces like BC and Saskatchewan that have one pro and no oversight body like Rpra? Many businesses owners have offices throughout the country, so knowing what those differences would be helpful. So that's something we will take away.
Absolutely.
Okay, so there's no more questions here on Zoom, and our inboxes as well. There's no questions there. So that's it for today. I will we will close it. We'll close it here. As mentioned, we are recording this, so we will be posting a recording of this 8 p.m. later this week, and a link will be shared so you can go back and watch it. You know, as well, if you haven't already subscribed to our newsletter, that's another way to stay in the loop of all of our activities and updates and upcoming events and things like that. So that's something you can do on our website. There's a subscription button there. If you have any other questions, maybe that's something triggered you throughout this, send us an email afterwards as well to info@rpre.ca. If you have questions about your specific regulatory requirements, we recommend you emailing registry@rpre.ca as a direct line to our registry support team. So with that, I will thank everybody for joining us. Thanks to our presenters for answering all the questions and doing their speeches. And thank you again. We look forward to continuing our work with you this year and years to come. Have a nice day.